Welcome to the Winterberry Wildlife Tech Series. In this video I'll be taking a closer look at the Bushnell Core DS 4K trail camera. We'll start with an overview, give some examples of video, and end with a teardown. Here goes. The Core DS features a latched door design, as you can see here. With the door open, you can see an LCD display, the on-off buttons, a battery eject button, and a keypad for using the interface. The DS4K has two camera sensors, one with an IR filter and one without. This eliminates the need for an IR filter motor and the click that's made by most other trail cameras when going from night to day images or vice versa. The DS4K has a LCD screen that shows the menu system and allows previewing of photos and videos in the field. Unfortunately, I find this 1.5-inch screen to be too small and too low contrast to be read reliably in the field. When I press the battery eject button, the 6 battery cartridge comes out. With the newer processor, the DS4K gets as much work out of 6 AA batteries as some other cameras models do with 8. I wish Bushnell had taken advantage of this by making the rest of the camera a little bit smaller. One other thing to look at before we look at some video, the external power supply adapter, which is here on the bottom, has a 2-pin screw-on waterproof connector. This connector certainly looks like it will do the job, but it's not the more typical barrel detector that you see in most other trail cameras. And all this means is that you may be restricted to Bushnell equipment when looking for external power supplies. Now we'll take a look at some video examples. In this first sequence I show side-by-side video comparisons of different video resolution. I found there to be little practical difference between these, even when I zoomed in 4 times with video editing software. I found the audio on this camera to be wanting. It's noticeably more muted than the other cameras in this class. Here are some examples of different frame rates. At resolution below the highest, 4K, the DS4K offers 60 frames per second. I find the higher frame rate to improve the video quality more than the higher resolution, especially when using slow motion effects in a video editor. In night mode, I compared low, medium, and high illumination settings. I see a noticeable difference between the low and medium settings in the video, but not much of a difference between the medium and high. You can consider setting this camera to medium flash to conserve battery. Okay, let's take this camera apart and see what's inside. I'll start by taking apart these Phillips head screws. There are 6 of them hidden in holes around the back of the case. Before I take the case apart, I'll pop the battery cartridge out. Then I'll remove the cover for the external power supply connector, which is part of the rubber gasket that seals the case. One of the things I notice about the gasket that goes all around the edge of the case is that it doesn't go around the screw post, nor are there any plugs to seal the screw holes. This omission could lead to moisture sneaking in around the screw holes. Now that we have the camera open, we can look more carefully at the major pieces. Here is the main circuit board. We see the main processor. This is the cable that goes to the external power supply connector. Here is a flex cable that goes to the LCD display and keyboard. This is the flex cable that goes to the second camera sensor. This cable goes off to the light sensor and LED on the camera faceplate. These 2 cables look like they go to 2 microphones on the front face. One of the things I'd like to point out is the use of connectors on most of these cables. This is a nice feature, which makes the camera more serviceable, and I feel like it will improve reliability versus just tacking the cables onto the board with solder. There are 2 connections to the main circuit board that don't have connectors. the connection to the batteries, and the connection to the flash LEDs. The next step, before we remove the main circuit board, is to remove the cables from the connectors. These connectors just pull out, which I can do here by pulling them gently apart. I don't think the position of the two microphone cables matters, but just to be sure I'm going to fold them over the case in the same position as the connectors so that I can put them back together the same way. The two flex cables are held in place by pressure connectors. There is a gray plastic bar that extends across the connector just past the edges of the flex cable. Using a plastic tool, I push the ears out towards the edge of the circuit board, applying a little pressure to one side then the other. I'll do this for both connectors. Now we're ready to remove the main circuit board. There are 4 screws that hold it in place. Note that there are 2 different kinds of screws. At the top are 2 black pan head screws, and at the bottom are 2 standard head silver screws. I'll make sure to put these back in the same place. Okay, now we can remove the main circuit board. I still had an SD card installed, and now is a good time to take it out. Now I can lift the main circuit board out. I do this gently so that I don't damage the connections to the battery and LED array. As I remove the board, I carefully slide out the flex cables from their connectors. Now we can see the back side of the main circuit board as well as the other components. Here is the primary camera lens, which is mounted to the main circuit board. Here is the cage for the holder for the SD card. This is the USB connector on the bottom. This is the PIR sensor at the top. It's worth noting that the heat-sensitive PIR sensor on the back side of the board is actually quite close to the main processor. This short thermal path could lead to run-on triggering, but I haven't seen it in this camera, possibly because the newer, more efficient processor operates at a lower temperature. So that was the main circuit board. You can see there are a couple of secondary circuit boards. At the bottom is the board for the LCD display and keyboard. In the middle is a small board which has a second camera sensor on it. You can see it has a flex cable sticking off to the side. The black LED board is behind the camera board. I'll remove the camera board and the LED board now, starting with the camera board. It's held in place by 2 screws on the diagonal, which I'll remove now. The camera module comes out next. I'll set that aside. Now we can get at the LED board. It's held in place by 3 panhead screws, which I'll remove. I gently push the flex cable on the LCD display just enough so that I can remove the bottom screw. With these 3 screws removed, the LED board lifts right out. Now we can see the front of the LED board, which includes 6 high-power LEDs and lenses mounted to the board. Now the faceplate is exposed and we can see the 2 windows for the camera sensors as well as the Fresnel lens for the PIR sensor. We can also see 2 microphones mounted on the top right corner and the LED and light sensor over on the left side. I'm not going to remove these boards. They're just held in by screws. The microphones looks like they're glued in. I think it's worth pointing out that the Fresnel lens array is glued rather than screwed in. This will make it tricky to remove if you need to replace a damaged Fresnel lens in the camera. So now that I've gotten everything apart, it's time to put it all back together. And that's it. One final check to make sure it turns back on, and I'm done. Thanks for watching. Now that you have your trail camera back together, find great places to put it in Janet's book, found on Amazon.